Hello, welcome to our interview series. My name is Leanne Mallory, and I'm the founder, CEO, and lead facilitator at Leading in Motion. We specialize in connecting business leaders with the wisdom of their bodies so that they and their companies can thrive. In just a moment, I'm going to dive into an interview with another of our fascinating experts on the topic of dance and business. But first, just a few words on why we're here. So this interview is part of a larger project called the Corporate Dance Maven, supporting dancers and teachers of dance of all kinds to break into the corporate market. We're here to help you figure out how to do the difficult and rewarding work of teaching dance in the business context. So whether you're currently teaching dance in companies or you're a novice, whether you're an internal person training in organizations or you're an external service provider, our aim is that our programs really help you take your work to the next level. So I'm here today with an expert called John Michael Schert, and he's been dancing since he was 6 years old. John Michael is a visiting artist and social entrepreneur at the Chicago Booth School of Business. He's recently become a leading international thought leader on the utility of the creative process. In other words, how the skills we embody as dancers can add value in the workplace. So John Michael, welcome, and I'd love to give you a chance to say a few words about yourself.
Great, thanks so much for having me, Leanne. I'm a lifelong dancer. So I've been doing this since I was 6 years old, like most warm-blooded American boys, did the Nutcracker in South Georgia. And then I had what is a somewhat typical, I guess, path for a dancer, atypical for the average American teenager. Moved to New York, started my career dancing with American Ballet Theater at age 18. And then I've had a great career dancing with many companies around the world. I think what was different about my career path was that I also had the privilege to become an executive director of a dance company at a young age. So in my 20s, I was serving as executive director of Trey McIntyre Project, a company I co-founded, while concurrently also dancing. And I think it was really during that time that I started to clue into the ways we state the value of dance as an art form, and the ways we state the value of dancers, and the way we state the value of the process, the creative process that we as artists in a very broad capacity go through when creating our art. And that as the executive director of a dance company, that was actually the greatest value we gave to our community, was this process and not necessarily the product, the show on stage. That's not really, I think, the best we have to give the world.
Thank you. And so John Michael and I met at a conference called Design for Dance. And the first time that I heard you speak, I was really blown away by this concept of what you call the utility of the creative process. And what the sense I've made of it so far, and the way I think of you when I think of it, is that we have embodied these skills or capacities as dancers that don't necessarily always get named. And we often don't know how to make sense of them when we're talking about our usefulness, if you will, in the business context. Will you tell us a little bit more about what you see there and what you're teaching around that?
Definitely. A couple of years ago, I did a fellowship at the somewhat new NYU Center for Ballet and the Arts. And in that fellowship, I really wanted to better articulate what are these values, these skills, these embodied skills that dancers might possess. And so I interviewed a number of late career experienced dancers, ballet dancers, social dancers, modern dance, contemporary dance, a lot of people from different ilk. And what we sort of arrived at are one of the skills that came to the fore that every dancer was able to somewhat sort of give voice to, was that dancers are masters of nonverbal communication. We are exceptionally skilled at understanding the difference in a gesture, or if you did a gesture with your thumb up versus your thumb down, like just even what's the difference in these micro ways of speaking, that there's something there. Every dancer in some way said, I'm really good at reading the room. I'm really good at sort of understanding where people are at, emotionally, physically, what the dynamic is, why it's not working, why it is working. But then after further questioning, and I had teamed up with a sociologist from NYU to help me in this sort of interview process, we found that dancers are incredibly skilled at being masters of nonverbal communication, but they're very unskilled at verbally articulating that they are masters of nonverbal communication. So the crux of it is that there are these amazing capacities that dance artists possess through a lifetime of endeavoring in the process. again, not just executing the form, not just becoming masterful at the precision, the execution, the technique. That's part of it. That's definitely a huge part of any pursuit, any profession in life. You master the known, like the knowledge, the technique, the training, and you do the best you can work to master it. But the endeavoring in the process is how you daily continue to make sense of the information in front of you, how you daily continue to make sense of your own body, how that body relates to others, how you continue to work with and process the inheritance you've been given, in the case of a dancer, the choreography. But that's no different than someone working in a corporate finance department, and the data is constantly coming in, and how you make sense of that information, how you not just replicate or duplicate this information as a dancer, don't just go on stage and do a bunch of steps, but how you really turn them into art making, tapping into what is possible, what is next. The man I used to work for in San Francisco, Alonzo King, would always say, I don't want to see the steps, I want to see the ideas. So I think as an artist, as a dancer, we go deep with our own body, which is a great vehicle and a great vessel. And we are constantly trying to, yes, replicate, duplicate with great precision, and do it at a very demanding standard. And there's a lot to be said about that. But I'm more interested in how we not just master the form, how we master the process as well.
Thank you. I have a variety of different questions. One question I have in that, though, is, so for someone who is now a master of nonverbal communication and is interested in actually starting to try to do that translation process and therefore bring their skills forward in different ways, what advice would you give them in terms of how to start filling themselves out in that way?
So a lot of interesting conversations are coming up, and I'm so excited by what you're creating here to have this forum and these set of tools. I think that the first place to begin, though, is I call it the translation of your skills. So you know it in one way. So maybe as a dancer, you know it in a certain context. You know that in a studio setting, you're very good at reading your coworkers, understanding what they're going to do before they do it, understanding the dynamics of the team, understanding everyone's emotional intelligence to a degree, like really sort of like piecing it together. The translation that's necessary is, can you now switch? Can you take those set of awarenesses, those set of skills, can you now take them out of context? So remove them from the environment by which you currently know them. And can you now take them also out of the form through which you know them, which is maybe your body and a nonverbal, and translate them into a verbal, articulate way. So this is the task that I give to dancers, usually very experienced dancers, professionals that I work with, but I think it's applicable to a wide variety of dance artists. You have to start to challenge yourself to do these micro translations, which is what I began to do when I became an executive director and was still dancing. It's like, okay, so same case in point. If you're very good at being a team member in a studio context, are you outside of that realm? Are there environments or situations where you're also being a team member, maybe an organizational structure? Like, are you participating in a community endeavor in which you're volunteering your time, or you also have a side job where you are working in an office setting? How do you bring those same sorts of abilities that you have as a dancer to this new environment? How are you able to name sort of what's going on, reading the room? And this is the challenge. And how are you able to verbally articulate it and in a way that your other team members who don't share that same skill as you see it as an asset? So that's, I think, the barriers that I find are not that the world, other sectors don't see the value of dancers. It's just they sort of need to be stated very clearly and succinctly. I have these skills. I'm very good at empathetic reasoning. Whatever we want to name them. And there's a lot of skills we can name. And people are like, oh, that's great. So how do I utilize that? And it's really up to the dancer, I think, to say, well, I can be of value in this way, in this way, in this way. And so I think the first step for a lot of dancers, though, is just learning to translate these abilities outside of the context and outside of the form of what you typically know yourself through your body.
Yeah. So I hear a couple of things. I hear really being able to make sense of the superpowers that we have, that we've embodied over time, and know what they look like in other contexts and be able to say this is what they are. But then also I heard you say, being able to say, and so then this is how you can use me, or this is how I'm useful in your context, given that I'm a master at reading the room, or given that I mean, I really relate to this personally, that there's been in my own sort of transition from being more dancer to more corporate trainer person, there's been this like, I have this way that I can pick up on things that other people don't necessarily pick up on, but then how do I actually, get myself in a situation where I can explain that to someone and then people will know to come to me for that, right? It's like, oh, use me in this situation. So I hear you saying we need to take responsibility for that ourselves to make ourselves useful in those contexts, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, we currently live in a world that values things you can measure and quantify. So part of the onus then is on basically you're naming something that's considered qualitative and then giving it a quantitative voice. Like it's valuable in this way and this way. And my time is worth this, but also I can help in these ways. And so that's just kind of how we make sense of value currently. And so that's part of the translation as well, is you have to articulate the measurable value of what you have to give.
I wasn't going to ask this now, but you're talking about it, and I wanted to go here. So one of the things that's also come up in some of my other interviews, and that has come up a lot with the people that I work with, is how do we actually place a monetary value on the services we're offering? So for many of us, it's going to look a bit more like I'm teaching this work in the context of corporations. How do I tell them what to pay me? But it could also be, I'd like you to hire me for this job, and I need to hold myself in such an esteem that I think that I'm bringing something worthwhile. What advice would you have for us around how to think about our value in, let's say, corporate dollars kinds of context?
Yeah. So let's fast forward first. Like let's move forward 10, 15, 20 years in the future. Just like there were not chief technology officers before technology was a common tool that was being used in corporations, just like there weren't really like chief information officers or chief strategy officers or chief sustainability officers. Let's fast forward in time and say that there is a position called director of physical intelligence or master of nonverbal communication that exists in all sorts of companies. Law firms will have it, hospital systems will have it, corporations. And it can look very different place to place, but really, some of the statistics I like to quote are that 93% communication is nonverbal, correct? And 55% supposedly of the ways we communicate as humans, 55% is body language. So the dominant form of communication is body language. Just stating that fact, that means the majority of our workforce is horribly inarticulate at the dominant form of communication. They've been given almost no training. As humans, we all understand body language. We all understand facial expressions to a degree. But just like, we've already learned how to measure varying degrees of physical prowess, of singing ability, or we've very much quantified degrees of people's intelligence and how you rank throughout your youth, and then what schools you go to, and that you can then go work in this sort of job and it's worth more. We haven't really applied the same metrics to like degrees of reading nonverbal communication. And so again, just to state it somewhat bluntly, if it's the dominant form of how we communicate, I do think that we already societally are realizing iconography, paralinguistics, facial recognition, emotional intelligence, all these ways of reading things are sort of still qualitative in a way, like hard to measure or define. They're growing in nature. I read a statistic, Leanne, I think you and I have actually written about this before. I think it was a factoid we used in an article you and I wrote together. Something like Finland, like 85% of communication in Finland now is emojis and iconography, right? So we're already like working in these ways of expressing what we're saying through a different medium than just words. And so fast forwarding into the future, there is this position that exists. What would that position look like? What would that person do? And so if we now track that backwards, what's the low-hanging fruit that we as a community of dance artists should be endeavoring to state now at this moment and monetize for at this moment? What's the easiest things? Well, virtual reality is growing, wearable technology is growing, iconography is growing, all within the tech sphere. Why shouldn't dancers be highly sought after to be masters of the difference in how you use gesture within a virtual reality realm to signify different states of being? And our colleague Sydney Skybetter does a lot of great work with that. That in some respects that's a low-hanging fruit because we can already envision it. It's like, yeah, we should be using dancers in that way. So then what's the adjacent possible? What's the next potential way that dancers could or should be building the case for them to be directors of physical intelligence, right? So I think there's a thread of logic, an analytic thread of logic we need to follow of how we state that value. And then you kind of get this win and, oh, there's something there, and then you can move on to the next. But I don't know about you, but I keep reading article after article after article from every different sector, from agriculture to politics to finance to healthcare to education. And I keep reading these little blips and factoids. And maybe, like me, I'm sure people forward you stuff all the time to read. And people keep coming to these sort of like broad conclusions. We really need farmers in the future that are much more intuitive and thoughtful and able to convey imagery and metaphor. And then a lot of times they'll go as far to say, we really need farmers to be more like artists. And all this training that's happening in healthcare right now about doctors and nurses being more empathetic. And there's even like some training programs where they go into museums and study art and learn how to let the art work on them rather than working on it. So gone are the days where I think it's about efficiency and speed. We've left our agrarian economy, we left our industrial economy, we currently live in an information technological economy. There's arguments being made that we're moving into a purpose economy. How do you have purpose? How do you have what's a balance of intrinsic matched with extrinsic? So where the information economy was more about data and metrics that were coming from sort of external sources a lot of the time, and then you were sort of reading the market and finding that white space. I think the purpose economy is going to be much more about how you're listening to yourself. How are you paying attention to what's coming up within you, and then how does that filter through the lens of what is happening in the world and what's needed? How do you have purpose? Well, for me, broadly associating another way of saying having purpose, it requires having presence. How are you present? That is another hallmark of dancers, and that was something that was also discovered in the fellowship I did at NYU interviewing late career dancers. They all know how to be present, and that is currently still considered like a almost spiritual word in some realms, like who's so present. We can call it charisma, we can call it a lot of different things, but really it's a skill. It's a skill that you can train. It's a meditative state, it's a flow state, as the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi would say, like how are you in your optimal state, where you're everything you are and everything you're about to become. You're available, you're letting things work on you as much as you're working on them. So we fast forward 15 years, there's this position called Director of Physical Intelligence. I think we just need to keep chipping away at the case we need to make to state that that is an essential future path for all firms, all corporations, all civic governments, because again, the ways we communicate are dominantly nonverbal and dominantly through body language. And if that's true, who speaks best in the realms of qualitative communication? Well, a lot of them are artists, a lot of them are creatives.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that you said that really struck me is connecting the purpose conversation to all of this. I don't hear a lot of people doing that, but I really feel strongly in agreement that the embodied wisdom and the capacity to listen physically and to listen in a more embodied way really does open or start to unlock this door to being purpose driven or being connected, or even knowing what purpose is or what's calling to you. And I know that that's a big thing in the business world right now, but I don't see a lot of embodied people going after that particular fruit because it feels like it's a few steps removed. But for me, it's like really quite inseparable.
Yeah, so this translation that I talk about, like how do you translate your ability and skills? So I advocate for find the intrinsic motivation first, your sense of purpose. So as an artist, as a dancer, you have these abilities, you know how they are applied in one context, in one setting, as a, in the studio, on the stage, whatever. Now, how do you translate into these new realms? That's when you then filter the intrinsic up through the extrinsic, like need or demand. So the translation is use the right words. Like purpose is a very popular word in corporations right now. How is that the same as presence? So you can say, well, I'm very skilled at having purpose within my work and understanding how to train those around me to have more presence so that we can arrive at a unified vision of what we're seeking to accomplish. How is that not what a dancer does?
And that sounds very corporate appropriate to me. People are going to want that, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So the translation, when I use that word translation, and what I do when I work with both dancers and artists, and then when I'm also working with corporations, is getting them both to understand each other's worlds. Because in that understanding comes appreciation, and that appreciation comes a sense of shared need or shared ownership over, oh yeah, well, we could use you in that way.
Yeah, let's talk about need for a second. So I heard different things, right? I heard you tell your own story and kind of talk about teaming, and then there's communication, and then there's purpose, all these things. Given the different skills that we have to bring to bear, if we're creating training programs, who are our clients? Like, who needs this stuff in business?
Well, I mean, who doesn't need it? But I think who doesn't need it? I think we can make the case for almost any sector in business to better need these sorts of skills. So I do some consulting for financial firms, mutual funds, investment, wealth management houses. They're dealing with the same human interpersonal relationships that anybody is. And they need help with how they interface with clients, how they interface with their own teams. So the skills that need to be brought to bear are not specific to finance, but the articulation the dancer needs to make when going into a financial realm will be different than when going into a healthcare realm. So this is the translation. And this is also the rigor that the dance artist has to go through. They don't have to become a specialist in finance or a specialist in healthcare, but they do have to know that world well enough to use the right language, right terms. And they also have to be able to sort of like see what kind of dynamic is at play. So I was working with a small financial team of 3 recently. They're working on succession planning, and the team leader felt that the team members are not really exercising degrees of collaboration that he wants to see them have. And it was an interesting consultation because they didn't really know that was the gist of what we were meeting to talk about, that they needed to be better collaborators, which what is collaboration? Requires empathy. It also requires high levels of vulnerability. Like to really collaborate is not always just stating what you know and then, it's not merging everybody's opinion. And so, it's really like making yourself vulnerable to the process and to the other people in your group. So we did like a 3-hour session, and really like it was me getting them to articulate how they best practice their own vulnerability and empathy, but getting them to name it in their words and their language and ways that they do it through their profession and with their families. And that's a lot of what I find we're called to do as artists and as dancers. I call it permission giving. Like we're not here always to give them a 10-step process and now you too can be creative and you too can be empathetic and you too can now exercise embodied cognition. We do have to have the steps and the formats that give them the ability to practice, because practicing is huge, huge, huge. But we also have to give them the permission just to say, you're allowed to now tap into these aspects of yourself.
That's beautiful. I really relate to that in my work, that there's the model maybe that we have as a trainer, but then there's just you being that presence that makes it okay for them to open these doors that they're not necessarily typically opening, or access the parts of themselves that are more vulnerable or are more emotional or are just more human in different ways.
Yeah, and I think in some respects, it's a very hard job to do that, to be the permission giver, because you're not coming at this from a place of, again, quantifying, well, here's what you need to do and here's how I'm going to help you. You have to also make yourself very vulnerable in that moment and say, why is that value? Like giving them permission and getting them to articulate it. So you're not coming out of this like, listen to me, I have all these things to say. It's like, I don't know. I think you know. So what's blocking you or preventing you from arriving at that answer?
Mm.
That's what I learned as an artist and as a dancer, under the tutelage of great choreographers and mentors. They taught me over time that once you become masterful, whatever your form is, so if your form is finance, if your form is healthcare, Alonzo King would also say, I'm just going to assume that you're a genius, meaning like, I'm not here to talk about the fine points of your technique or the fine points of like your workflow procedures. Like, let's talk about something bigger. So I'm just going to assume that you're a genius and you're a hedge fund manager. I'm going to assume you do your job very well. What's preventing you from doing your job even better? Like, why are you not feeling like you're getting the fulfillment that you're seeking? Why are you feeling like your team as a whole is not functioning, but you're doing really well? Getting them to think bigger and broader. I often find that people actually have a lot of the solutions embodied. It's in them somewhere, but they just don't know how to access it.
Beautiful. I really also relate to the, like I'll have a lot of folks come to me if I enter a corporate space and say, A, I look young for one, B, you don't know anything about finance. How are you going to help me with this? And then one of the first things I often say is, I'm not an expert at your business. I'm not an expert at finance. I actually trust you to be really good at those things, or we wouldn't be here in this conversation. But what I am good at is, reading nonverbal communication or accessing emotions or working with this stuff that maybe you have less facility in. And being able to articulate that as a person coming in is part of how I think I build my trust with the person, credibility with the person, and then they're able to go, oh, wow, those are things that I could cultivate skill in as well. I'd like to learn more about that. And then suddenly we have a relationship where I can actually offer something to them.
Exactly. And, let's be honest, people in these environments value their time highly. They've done a lot of ice-breaking team building exercises through the years. Sometimes they're a little bit cynical about someone of our ilk coming in and supposedly having this new approach that's going to change everything. So yeah, I try to mitigate that. If they have defensiveness, I do sometimes try to like quickly show them I'm also an expert. And so, we can trust each other as experts. We speak different languages, but the point of today is like, let's help you access parts of yourself that are maybe not fully skilled yet. And I am very skilled in those things. This is what you just said. Like, I am skilled in these things and I can help you become more skilled in them.
Totally. I really like the example that you gave and how it wasn't, let's break the ice, let's do some movement for the sake of that, but actually that you're talking about working with a very high level team and that they're looking to develop the skills of collaboration or communication, even at the highest level in an organization. So I appreciate you bringing an example that's not, it's great. Some of us will go in and lead movement for the sake of people having more energy, and it'll happen at the lowest levels in an organization. But some of us are actually going to take the skills that we have and do it with the executives or do this kind of work at different levels. And I think it's needed all the way up and down. So thanks for bringing that kind of example.
Definitely. Yeah.
So we're close to the end of our time. I'm so grateful for this conversation. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I've got a soul brother out there who's thinking about these things in really similar ways and who's clearly articulating it well and educating the world about it. It's just beautiful every time I hear you speak. I wonder if there's maybe some closing words, or knowing that a lot of the folks who will watch this video are folks who are interested in bringing their skills to bear on the corporate world, just advice that you would have in closing for them.
Yeah, the practice is constant. So the practice is, you have to practice these translations. You have to keep trying them out. Like, find your own words, find your own articulation, find environments and scenarios where you can state, oh, I've got this skill, and be I don't believe in confidence. I believe in clarity, like keep seeking clarity about what you're saying. Confidence sometimes is a double-edged sword because confidence has a little bit too much ego in it sometimes, where it's like, well, I need to be the best at this, or I need to, and I say that because sometimes I think dancers are incredibly humble beings a lot of the time, and a lot of our training has taught us to be very humble, which gives us a lot of the skills that we're seeking to now proclaim. Like, we are great team members. We're also great leaders, emergent leadership, the idea that you step forward and you are the leader, and you can equally without ego blend back into being part of the ensemble is a great thing. But I think sometimes our humility or even our ego, dancers are sometimes reticent to say, well, I'm going to go do that thing. I'm not going to do that thing until I've become masterful at it. I have to go do all this training, and I have to go do all this, to go back to school and learn how to do all this, because we think it has to be at the same level as our specialty, which is our dance. So I just challenge everyone, don't hesitate to be putting these translation skills to practice. Mm-hmm. Don't wait until you feel like you've received the right amount of training to begin. Like, there will always be training tools like what you're offering here, Leanne, that will give people ongoing education and ongoing skills training. But the translation has to start with you, again, and finding that intrinsic voice, and then finding the extrinsic circumstance by which you can voice it. So don't go ahead and line up a moment where you can facilitate a discussion of finance friends. Maybe it's just over drinks at a bar. But go ahead and start trying out moments where you can bring a new voice to the table. Find scenarios where you can sit on boards, whether it's advisory or volunteer or corporate or whatever, where you're a voice at the table that's maybe different than the other people. Don't be hesitant to step into environments where your voice will be incredibly valuable. Don't be hesitant because you think you haven't sharpened your voice enough yet. You won't sharpen it until you go through this process 1,000 times. So just begin doing it.
As in dance and as in life, we need to practice our skills. Thank you. I totally agree. So if we want to follow you, John Michael, how can we track you? Is there a website? Is there a Twitter account? Where can we best find and watch what you're up to?
Currently, my homepage at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business website is probably the best place. They post a lot of links there to things I write or presentations I give. There will be a forthcoming series of essays being published about my work. Can't say too much about it right now, but it will be coming out in the near future. And I'm not the best at social media just yet, because I've been sort of living in this process of discovery. And I think that soon I'm going to have more things maybe to concretely say. But for the time being, probably the homepage at Booth, but also just moments like this. And being asked to participate in your series is really a great honor, Leanne. Thank you for having me, because it gives me another moment to practice, another moment to say these words, and to, as you said, find soul sisters and soul brothers who are in this endeavor together, and we keep growing this family. So if anyone sees this, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm always interested in growing that network of like-minded people who are doing this work.
Thank you. And we will, if you put out things that you want me to share, I'll be happy to let our audience know here. And I think one of the other folks and I were talking about how so many of us doing this kind of work maybe don't know each other yet, or haven't heard about each other, or haven't met. And really, I think one of my genuinely heartfelt goals and intentions here is to connect us all so that we can bring the web of this kind of work forward more quickly and more wholly, if that makes sense. So thanks for being a part of this. To the audience who is watching and listening, I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time with us. If you want to learn more about how to teach dance in business, you can track us down on Facebook at the Corporate Dance Maven. We'll also soon have a website live at the same site, so corporatedancemaven.com, or feel free to reach out to me, Leanne, at leadinginmotion.com. Thank you all for being here.